Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We're watching Season 5, and we've reached Episode 6, 316. Of course, this is the episode where the Oceanic Six, well, 5 of the Oceanic Six, I guess, return to the island.
This is also the episode where Jeff Fahey, playing Frank Lapidus, returns to the show as the pilot of Ajira 316, and as we mentioned last week, we'll have Jeff on as our interview guest, first of 2 parts this week.
We have a lot of ground to cover this week, so let's not waste any time. Let's get started. We are very excited to have received a number of hot takes from all of you this week. We're going to start with this one from Sean.
Hey, this is Sean in San Diego. I've been listening to The Hatch since the beginning, and I really love it. Just listened to your episode on This Place is Death, and I wanted to point out something I found super hilarious. Ben's creepy carpet van has the name Canton Rainier emblazoned on the side, and I wanted to see if it anagrams to anything, like the Hofsdralar funeral parlor anagrammed to Flash Forward. Turns out that Lostpedia, of course, has a whole page dedicated to anagrams in the show, and Canton Rainier anagrams to reincarnation, which is pretty cool, but even better, Charlotte Staples Lewis anagrams to Walt Steele's helicopters. I wish they had gone that direction. Keep up the great work. Love the podcast.
I gotta say, I knew about the van anagram. I had never heard Walt flies helicopters before.
Yes, Walt Steele's helicopters, in fact.
Oh, pardon me.
Would have been fine with that, as would Sean have been. Now, the reincarnation one's cool because, of course, he's driving Locke's body around in that van, and we're at least led to believe that Locke gets reincarnated this season, although that's not no, the anagrams are cool. The anagrams are cool, I agree. We've got several more hot takes here, but before we do, as long as we're talking about last week, I have a confession to make here. You may recall my hot take last week was about the sort of sadism of the man in black telling Locke, "Say hello to my son," when that was a meaningless comment to Locke, and I just thought the dude was kind of screwing around. Several astute listeners reminded me, and I feel embarrassed to have forgotten this, that actually turns out to be quite important when Locke, in his final conversation with Jack before at least making plans to commit suicide, Locke figures out that it would have been Jack's father and tells Jack, "Your father says hello," and that's the thing that seems to push Jack, over the edge and in the direction of ultimately returning to the island. So that is my bad. That turned out to be important. The man in black is a master manipulator, and I underestimated him when I forgot that. So excuse me, and thank you for everyone who corrected me.
He does still say it with a twinge of,
No, you're right. He enjoys it too much.
Yeah, I think
so
you can still stand on that.
I'll stand on that, but I had forgotten the significance. One other comment we got about last week that I really liked, and this was not a voicemail, but our listener Matthew on Facebook wrote, "I liked your concept of what a Charlotte flashback might look like. I also think there was a huge missed opportunity for her to actively contribute during the flashes. She's an anthropologist, and we never get to see her use this skill outside of her pulling Korean out of nowhere. Her background as an anthropologist should have well equipped her to help the group determine what time they were in." I think that's, and he also comments here, she could have gleaned some insights from the French science team or from the architecture of the temple. I think that would have been super cool and would, I really think we were onto something, and Matthew extends it here. There would have been a very, very cool Charlotte story if they had wanted to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. Next up, I guess we should just keep them coming. We have this comment from Barry, which this revisits a take that Barry left a couple years ago.
Hi, it's Barry calling from the Maple Syrup Station in northern Vermont, and I've really enjoyed having you guys back in my podcast app every week. It's delightful to have you back, and I'm especially excited because a recurring theme that the two of you seem to have in your hindsights and pre-interview conversations this season revolve around John Locke being manipulated by the man in black. And I looked and I cannot find my original voicemail that I sent you a couple of years ago with my theory that John was being manipulated by the man in black from the time that he got on the island until the very end. So I think it's high time that we consider revisiting that conversation, and hope you can find the original one I sent. Thanks, and namaste.
Just to fill in the blank here, Barry's initial hot take was that when Locke met the smoke monster for the first time, way back in season 1, I believe.
Yes, back at the beginning.
He actually fell under the spell of the Man in Black at that time and has sort of been being manipulated this whole time. I could see it. I don't know that I agree necessarily, but it's interesting.
It is, and it's interesting, especially later. I seem to recall that at some point in season 6, we get a conversation between Jack and the Man in Black where they're, I think, talking about the fact that the Man in Black was, appearing as Christian Shepherd, and his explanation for that was, well, you guys needed water, so I led you to water. He leads Jack to the caves in the episode White Rabbit. So I think there is, that suggestion by the Man in Black that he's been involved in, whether you want to call it helping or manipulating or whatever, since the very beginning. I think that adds some credence to Barry's theory here. There, especially in the context now where the manipulation is so explicit and obvious.
Yeah. Could
he have been starting this plot way back in season 1, building up Locke to believe that, he was a man of fate and destiny, only to use him for his own purposes? Potentially. I could see the Man in Black playing that long a game.
Yeah, that adds a good level of nuance to this, I think. I don't think it would be fair to say that Locke has been, under the spell of the Man in Black, the way that we see Claire and Saeed and others sort of get infected, to borrow Rousseau's word. That certainly isn't the case, I don't think. But he is, well, except for Mr. Echo, I guess, the only person who sort of meets the smoke monster and doesn't dialogue with it so much as, confronts it, but is not killed by it, which is typically the outcome.
Well, the Mr. Echo comparison is interesting because Mr. Echo gets killed after he very explicitly makes the choice that he's not going to do what the monster wants. I mean, the monster wants him to repent, and Mr. Echo says, nah, that's bullshit. I got nothing to repent for. Whereas Locke, I think the Barry's use of, falling under his spell, however you want to interpret that does seem to be what happens to Locke. I mean, that's one of the things when he looked into the eye of the island and what he saw was beautiful, and that set him on his path.
Huh.
For better or for worse. Maybe, Barry. We'll have more to say on this as we go along. But we do have one more hot take, I think, right?
We have 2 more, both about 316. So the first comes from Rachel, who we also heard from 2 weeks ago, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, it's Rev Rachel. And just 2 quick hot takes for this episode of 316. And it's moments of absolute dry responses that are absolutely hilarious. And there are several, but the 2 that stick out the best is when Jack asks Ben, "Did you know about the light? The lamppost?" And Ben says, "No, I didn't." And Jack says to Eloise, "Is he telling the is he telling the truth?" And Eloise says, "Probably not." That's so beautifully, just perfect. And then the other is, of course, when they're on the plane and Lapidus comes out to say hi to Jack and he sees everyone and he looks at Jack and says, "Oh, we're not going to Guam, are we?" So there's so much more in 316 that, God, I was on fire watching it, and my notes are extensive. Those two are the highlights, my hot takes. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, there were a lot of good lines this episode, and those are 2 of the best. And we will have a whole conversation with Jeff Fahey later in this episode about the not going to Guam line, which is such a good one. Our last hot take here is from William, and it's about the music of this episode.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is William from Michigan. I've got a hot take to leave you. It's about the episode 316 from season 5. It's more so I'm using this episode to kind of make a hot take in general about the importance of Michael Giacchino in a way, but it really has to do with this episode, though. But obviously, these great composers kind of come to rescue in moments where a viewer might be confused or kind of bored or something. this is something that happens all the time. But in the episode 316, when Jack boards that plane, just listen to how good that music is, man. It doesn't matter how corny it is that they got back on the plane and put, he put his dad's shoes on Locke and tried to make the flight just as if it was before. And who cares? The music is so good that it really, that's my hot take, is that the importance of Michael Giacchino, and it really carries everything and continues to do so and did before and blah, blah, blah. That's all I got.
Yeah, William, I think you could make this comment about virtually any episode in the series, but I think the music is used to really, really great effect in this one. There's a particular theme. According to Lostpedia, this song is called Flash Forward Flashback, and it plays when Jack is alone in his apartment, and then he hears this weird moving and goes in to find Kate there. And it's like this very creepy version of this theme that we've heard before with like a heavy piano, and it just sets the tone in this marvelous way.
The bit of music that came to my mind listening to William's comment was in the opening moments of this episode where Jack's eye slams open on the island. Mm-hmm. That is the theme that's called the Island, Yeyeland, and it's the music that plays in the opening moments of the show as well when Jack's eye slams open on the island. And so I loved the parallelism between that scene and this one, with the twist that Jack's eyes open and he looks like kind of shocked and happy here. But it is the same theme that's playing there, and it's very apparent, and it really sets my skin on edge in a good way.
Yeah.
That's the beginning of the episode and a good place to get in, but we probably should do our own hot takes here before we get started. We're going out of order. Rosie, what's your hot take for 316?
Yeah, great idea. So what about all the other people on this plane?
Oh, that's my hot take too.
Oh no, this hasn't happened in so long. I am so mad about that. I'm mad about this for two reasons. I'm not mad. I have strong feelings about this for two reasons.
Okay.
One, I don't really think you can just purchase a bunch of empty seats on a plane, but I'm glad Hurley does. Thank God somebody does.
The only one thinking about this, until Jack at the very last minute has like a twinge of regret and whatever.
It's only when he I guess they're all in first class for some reason, but he looks back through the curtain and sees just random people who are just trying to go wherever they're trying to go. And he says oh, what about them? And then Ben delivers possibly the iciest thing we ever hear Ben say.
And the other people on this plane, what's going to happen to them? Who cares?
Fuck that, Ben. These people do not deserve this. Surely you all could have chartered a plane somehow to do this and not put hundreds potentially of people in jeopardy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of those people survive.
No, I don't think so, because... Well, no, I mean, there are some others, but I do think they all must ultimately get killed, and frankly, I don't remember exactly the sequence of events. I think the monster might show up at some point and kill some of them, and obviously Ben shoots Caesar, and... I mean, right. Alana and Bram are there by choice, as are a couple of the others working with them. But yeah, a bunch of those people on that plane are true innocents, and they definitely don't make it out.
Yeah, that sucks.
Damn shame. No, and, with Hurley, it's I'm a little bit of two minds, because he is thinking about it, and he saves up to 78 lives apparently, potentially, which is great. On the other hand, he is kind of willing to accept that everyone else he can't help. I don't know. I mean, it's not like he doesn't deserve the same condemnation as Ben or the rest of them, but I guess he's still culpable, as they all are.
Yeah, I just wish there had been another way, and you would think that. One of after everything that they've been through, everything that they endured as a result of having gone to the island, wouldn't your number one priority be to not put a whole new crop of people through that? Even above or very, very near, reuniting with your husband or saving these people you love or whatever. Let's not start a whole new chain of events.
Yeah, I mean, for Sun, I guess you can, I know you just kind of alluded to this, but you can sort of see, you know, all she cares about is getting back to Jin. I guess the charitable interpretation is that she's just, you know, that's her priority. Hurley at least tries to buy some seats and save some people. Saeed doesn't have a choice. Saeed is not on this plane by choice. Ben, you know, doesn't give a fuck, obviously. Kate is in her own headspace with Claire-related stuff and going back to find Claire for Aaron. Jack, though, you would really, really think that would be Jack's top priority, like you said, because he was the guy who was always trying to save everybody.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I know he's got his own internal stuff going on, but he's not fully there yet. I mean, that's the whole point of this episode, that he's still, you know, struggling, and the man of science and man of faith sides are competing within him. And you'd think he'd be able to see clearly enough more than at the very last minute to just finally have the thought of like, gee, what's going to happen to these people? Mm-hmm. It's just not there.
Yeah.
I'm glad that was your hot take, because that was bothering the hell out of me too.
Oh, that made me mad. Anyway,
there is so much to talk about in this episode. I guess we could start with the opening.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the opening sequence of this episode is meant to be reminiscent of the pilot. Not only do Jack's eyes flash open and he's laying on the ground in the jungle, but the first thing he hears is someone yelling for help, and he springs into action and like dives off a waterfall to help
Jack.
Hurley. Classic Jack. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting choice to. They don't leave us in suspense at all. You know, they tell us like right from the jump that like, okay, at the end of this episode, this is going to work. You know, we're going to be back on the island, and then the rest.
At the very least, it's going to work for 3 of them. We don't know about the rest of them.
Right.
Yeah, I gotta say, I love the. I love the, and I think I've made this comment, you know, before this season, but I love the way they're kind of playing the story out and how they're choosing to order the events that they show us. Mm. Like, not only is that an interesting choice within this episode to start by showing us that they're going to make it and then flashing back to reveal what happened, like, I feel like something similar is happening on a lot of different levels here where, you know, in terms of, like, for instance, how they all got onto the plane, like, for such a long time, we've been seeing flash forwards with these people. And the question is going to be, how do they get to this place where they're going is the Oceanic Six. And now they're flipping the script again by setting up a situation where we're going to need some flashbacks to understand what happened. We're going to need to flash back what's going on with Kate. How did Saeed end up with an agent on this plane? You know, why is Hurley holding this guitar case, which is one that we don't get an answer on for a real long time. Like,
so when we left Hurley, he was in jail.
Yeah.
So
no, it's great. And, you know, why is Ben's face covered in blood? And they give you just enough with the shot of the marina there to think, oh no, is this, you know, Desmond and Penny related and what happened to them? Like, and, you know, one more thing about just the timeline and order of events. I just loved the ending where, you know, with the introduction of Jin wearing a Dharma jumpsuit, and it's like, wow, the last time we saw Jin, it was promising Locke, you know, making Locke promise not to bring Sun back to the island as they lower him down into this well. And we see Locke turn the wheel, and we have no idea what happens to them. And it's like, suddenly Jin is in a Dharma jumpsuit driving a Dharma van on the island. And it's like, just, what the fuck? How did this happen? And I mean, we're not going to learn for 2 more weeks how this happened. We're going to have to do the Locke episode first, and then we get LaFleur. And it's like they're flipping the show back to where it was before, away from flash forwards and towards flashback, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, just the order of stuff with Locke, where, I mean, one thing I thought was interesting is that they said on Lostpedia says that they flipped the order of these 2 episodes, that originally Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham was going to air before this one, and then this was going to air. And I like this a lot better because it sets up this stuff that's still to come, where it's like Ben is lying this week about, we learned that Locke committed suicide, and then, you know, we think that's the whole story. I think that's much more interesting, not knowing what the truth is, and then finding out later that was a lie. You know, I think it's interesting being introduced to Caesar this week rather than first seeing him on the island next week and knowing then that, you know, that's where he's going to end up in the present day. Like, just, I don't know, the order of events, and not to mention the fact that we're going to get Jeremy Bentham, and finally, after 1.5 years of knowing that a dude named Jeremy Bentham was in a coffin, to finally learn what happened, and only then after he's reincarnated. I'm just very, very impressed by the order of the storytelling and how they put together these timepieces. I think it's so, so cool. And that's what I was thinking about watching that opening sequence.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to me. I felt a little bit differently. I think this was not nearly as powerful for me watching it on a rewatch. The whole thing with Christian's shoes. Like, I get that the gauntlet that Eloise has thrown is like recreate conditions as much as you possibly can, but bring something that belonged to Christian feels very tangentially related to that to me. Like, why did the dead body have to be wearing the thing that belonged to Christian? It just felt like a very like strangely specific mission that didn't land for me.
That's so interesting. So I love that, and it landed with me in a huge way. And I'll tell you why. I think I have two reasons. One is that I just love that it created this interaction between Jack and his grandfather. Like, setting aside for a minute the fact that it's a little unbelievable that he's had a grandfather this whole time that we've never heard about, that Christian's dad, like, whatever, I'm willing to accept that. I love the interaction between them, you know, hearing Jack call him granddad, kind of, you know, Ray asking, you know, what happened to that woman with the freckles that you were seeing? Like, that was sweet. And, you know, Jack kind of realizing that this is going to be the last time they see each other, you know, and realizing that he was really saying goodbye. It was, I thought, a sweet moment. So I liked all of that. But the big reason it landed for me was that I think that what this whole episode was really about, and the key to them getting back to the island, even more than recreating the circumstances like Eloise is talking about, I think the big key was that Jack had to believe. That Jack had to be pushed just far enough onto the believe side of the science versus faith ledger that the island was willing to bring him back. I don't think it's a coincidence that the moment the turbulence starts and that transition begins is when Jack is reading Locke's suicide note that says, "I wish you had believed me," and he's starting to crack up and feel this, like maybe he should have believed Locke. I mean, the tension that Jack is feeling this whole episode, we see it when he's putting the shoes on Locke's body. He's going through with it, but he's still making this speech about how ridiculous it feels, like he's embarrassed that he's doing it.
Yeah. But at the same time, the act of doing it is an act of faith. In a way. Like, I guess he maybe is doing it because Eloise told him to, and she's, you know, the only person who really knows how any of this works. And so in order to accomplish the goal, he has to do what she says, even if he doesn't, quote unquote, believe it. But yeah,
I think this is the doubting Thomas thing.
Yeah,
I mean, Thomas said, you know, he did say we should go. This is Ben's speech. We should go back with Jesus, that we might die with him. But then he doesn't believe the resurrection, and that's what he's remembered for. I mean, it's both. Jack still has both of those Thomases in him. I think that's the point of Ben's speech. He's sort of there, but he's sort of not there, and I think he needs to be there more, or it's not going to work. I think that's what the shoes are about. I mean, I think the fact that, you know, Eloise told him he needs to go get something of his father's, and then he's not going to do it, it looks like. He's sitting at the bar drinking.
Right, and then he just happens to get that phone call, which does seem like fate.
Right. I think this is the universe nudging him and saying, no, you really ought to go along with this. It's giving him an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it gives him the opportunity to find the shoes. What's-her-face, Ben's associate, like, goes out into the back to get the van, which gives him, 2 minutes alone with Locke when he can do the switch. And frankly, I think if she'd been there watching, he wouldn't have done it. I think he only did it because he had that.
Yeah.
He would have been too embarrassed. So it's like, and then the suicide note. I mean, it's following him. Like, I think that what's happening here is, the universe, the island fate, whatever you want to call it, like, it's not gonna give Jack what he wants. It's not gonna bring them all back and do this unless he believes enough. And I think at the beginning of this episode he doesn't, and in that moment where he finally reads the suicide note, he finally believes just enough that, he's earned the right to go back and to bring them back and to be able to go save the day. I think that's what it's about more even than the specifics of, recreate the circumstance. It's about Jack and his own faith, and is he willing to do something like this that seems insane? It's and Eloise says it to him. She repeats the exact words almost that Locke says to him in orientation about pushing the button. That's why it's called a leap of faith. Right. I think that's what it's really all about. It's about Jack's leap of faith more than the specifics of, Locke needs to be wearing Christian shoes.
Yeah.
You don't seem convinced. You're not willing to take the leap of faith with me.
No, I agree. I agree largely with what you're saying, and I particularly like your point about, Jack is not sort of allowed to not read Locke's note. It keeps following, quote unquote, following him around. I think that makes a lot of sense. And of course, that is the moment when the turbulence starts. In sort of Christian theology writ large, there's sort of this tension between like what your faith can achieve and what your works can achieve. And like, I don't want to, I'm not an expert in these topics and I don't want to muck it up, but essentially, there are Christian traditions who believe that like faith alone can save you. All you have to do is sort of believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior and, sort of, accept him into your heart. The language around this takes a lot of different forms. And then that's all you have to do to like be saved and, become a Christian and eventually go to heaven. And then there are other Christian traditions that believe that faith is sort of the first step, but as an outgrowth of faith, you must sort of, if your faith is real, it will manifest itself in deeds and works. You can't just sort of have faith by itself and then like not do anything with it. And I think that is sort of what is a sticking point for me with this, because Jack is doing all the works, he's
interesting.
He's doing everything he's told with reluctance. But because he wants to go back to the island, because he does have enough faith to say like, okay, whatever, I'll go put these shoes on John Locke or whatever, And when Ben calls and says, I need you to go get John Locke's body, he says, okay. He doesn't really ask any questions. He just knows it's what he has to do. But it sounds like what you're saying is that he needed to have like a conversion, like a real conversion of his heart, in order to be granted like the return. It wasn't enough to check all the boxes and jump through all the hoops. It did need to be like a,
That is what I think. Yeah, I think you articulated that really nicely. And I mean, I am not a Christian, but if I were, I think I would be a much more of the, the works are what matter types. I mean, that's, to the extent that I practice my Judaism, I mean, I feel it in terms of, doing good deeds and trying to make the world better. I mean, that's the part that matters to me more than, believing one thing or another. But at the same time, I think that's what the show is communicating here. And I mean, my interpretation, at least, of the Thomas story, now that you've put it in that context, is that, it wasn't enough that he was willing to put his life on the line and go with Jesus to Judea. What he's remembered for is that he didn't believe in the resurrection, which is, seems to be that dichotomy again of work versus, works versus belief. He had the works, but he didn't have the belief. And that's, as Ben said, that's why he's still known today as Doubting Thomas. And in fact, I'm reminded now I mentioned last week the promotional art for season 6 that had them all in the Last Supper. Jack was in the Thomas role there. Yeah. That's what Lostpedia said. So I mean, I do think that's pretty explicitly what the show is saying here.
Yeah. Okay, I can go with you to this point, but then let me ask the sort of converse of this understanding of what's happening in this episode is like if Jack had never opened Locke's note, or if he hadn't experienced this change of heart in the way that he did, they would have landed in Guam, right?
That's my interpretation of it, yes.
So I guess Jack has been the man of science, and of course, like, for him to become fully realized, he must have an experience of faith. But yeah, I don't know. I think it sits oddly with me, perhaps in relation to the fact that there are a zillion other people on this plane, that like Jack's conversion experience has all of these effects for all of these other people, and it was all riding on him, and that's great that he had that experience. I'm happy for him. But it's it results in all these people dying.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's something I'm not comfortable with either, and is unfortunately something that seems to be a side effect of every major event on this show, that, innocent bystander. I mean, one thing I loved this episode is Desmond's speech.
Yes, I agree with this.
Both to Eloise and to Jack, where, when he says to Eloise,
you say the island's not done with me? Well, I'm done with the island.
And then his speech to Jack.
These people, they're just using us. They're playing some kind of game and we are just the pieces. Whatever she tells you to do, ignore it.
And it's so true. Yep. This is a game. I mean, it's literally, a game with very high stakes between Jacob and the Man in Black. And we can talk, and maybe should, about where Eloise does or doesn't figure into that. But yeah, I mean, these people are all, pawns on a chessboard to them. And the stakes are high and the choices they make matter. But he's totally right. They're being manipulated, and these major players don't seem to care a ton who lives or dies, as long as they get their way or the universe gets its way.
Well, and unfortunately for Desmond and also for Sayid, who does try to resist this, right? He tries to leave, and Alana, who is an arm of the island, basically acting in the real
Jacob
world.
Specifically.
Yes. Yeah. But goes to get him and drags him onto this plane, Yeah,
I feel terrible for Sayid.
Yeah.
Yeah, knowing what happens to Sayid and realizing that this is how it gets started, that basically Jacob has him kidnapped.
Right.
Not good.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess all of that, this conversation is helping me understand the weird taste that this episode left in my mouth. I think it's the idea that Jack has this conversion experience. It's not directly related, but at the same time that Jack is having this awakening, Sayid is being dragged into this fate that he does not want. And Desmond has tried to reject this fate, and Ben has tried to kill his wife, and he is trying to extricate himself from this, and he can't. And I am increasingly feeling like the island is kind of the villain here. And just some of the people who want no part of it, just let them have no part of it.
Yeah. And look, that's a good, and I have felt that way a lot of this season as well. I mean, I guess I'm going back and forth here because I think that the story with Jack is kind of beautiful, but at the same time, you're right. I feel that as well, or at least have felt that in past weeks, and it's really
and of course,
unfortunate.
Both of these things can be true at the same time. Jack can have this conversion experience that is deeply meaningful and remarkable for him, and Sayid can be dragged back in literal handcuffs, and
Desmond next season as well.
Yeah,
I guess, I mean, this is a real big picture thought, but I guess part of it just comes back to how serious do you think the conflict between Jacob and the Man in Black really is? I mean, Jacob has the metaphor with, keeping the wine in the bottle, and he basically suggests that if the Man in Black were to get off the island, he would destroy the world and, cause mass havoc and chaos. Whereas the Man in Black's attitude is just look, I just want to get off this island. I just want to go live my life away from this place. Which is understandable as well. And sure, the dude has done some evil stuff, but as we're discussing right now, so is Jacob. And, one side is black, one side is light. And, we know that that's not really, that fierce a dichotomy. It's much grayer. But really, I think a lot of this comes down to, what do you think would have happened if the Man in Black would have gotten off the island? Would the world have been okay, or would Jacob have been right, and that would have been the end for everybody?
Right.
And I think how you feel on that maybe has this ripple effect that it determines how you feel about all this stuff that happens in service of stopping him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, I guess. And maybe I'll feel differently when we watch season 6. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure someone is going to point out, and this is coming to my mind now, that there's also the stuff about the light at the heart of the island, and the Man in Black needs to snuff that out in order to go home, and the world is going to lose a positive force. So there is all that. But yeah, despite my feelings about the Jack storyline this episode, I think I'm generally at the same place that you're at right now, where when Desmond makes that speech, it's right on, man, good for you for telling them to go F off. That's how I felt when Sayid made that speech last week as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your analysis of what's happening with Doubting Thomas and Christian's shoes and Jack's reading of the suicide note is spot on. I think that is exactly what's happening. I just think for me and maybe it's supposed to be this way, it's just sort of, it could be this sort of very pure story, but there's all of this other stuff happening that reminds us that like the world is very complicated, and when we make these decisions, they do have ripple effects on the people around us. And you know, Jack is making decisions sort of, but he's also doing what Eloise and Ben tell him to, and this really is something that's happening inside Jack. He's not sort of moving the world, he's being moved, which is interesting, and something different from Jack, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. He's so much of the show, it's like boom, 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 I'm trying to save everybody, and now he's, you know, finally looking inward rather than outward, which Locke has been trying to get him to do for a while. And it's a transformation that's going to continue, I mean, through the bomb story at the end of the season, and through Lighthouse next season, and ultimately through his decision. And I mean, I guess overall, yeah, there's a lot still to come. The other thing I appreciated just briefly about the shoe story is how we finally got the explanation for why Christian was wearing white tennis shoes in the early part of the show.
Yeah, and that I actually thought was quite moving.
Yeah. He wasn't worth a nice pair of shoes to me. I mean, it's sad, but Jack's come a long way from then.
Yeah. I apologize. I know I'm always down on Jack, and he doesn't deserve it. Except sometimes he does. In this episode, I don't think he does. I think he's going through something like very profound. I'm just very distracted by all of the other stuff that's going on.
No, he does deserve it. It's all of the above. And look, you know me. I've been, you know, we developed a reputation early on in this podcast for complaining about Jack too much, and we've both, I think, come around on him somewhat since then. But it's complicated. I mean, overall I feel somewhat more positive toward Jack than the first time I watched the show, when I felt very negative towards him. And somewhat more negative about Locke, who the first time I watched the show I felt very positive about them, but I still have quite complex feelings about both of them. Like, you know, I want to be on board with Locke following fate and destiny, but I also, you know, feel like, wow, he's being manipulated and putting everyone at risk based on not a lot. And with Jack, I still want to be frustrated with him for, you know, his kind of arrogance and self-centeredness. Not self-centeredness. He wants to save people, but he just, you know, he's not really willing to consider other perspectives a lot of the time. And yet after an episode like this, I feel like, wow, it's so great to see him be introspective and thoughtful, even as he, you know, sends all these people to their doom. So it's complicated.
It's complicated.
Boy. You know, I mean, and this episode just brings home to roost, although we still don't learn it for a while, why I was so frustrated with Desmond earlier for pursuing this whole rabbit hole, because clearly he's created some danger for his family. I was reminded, you know, we had Fanula Flanagan on last week. For those who might not have, you know, if you haven't heard last week's episode, go back and listen to Fanula, who played Eloise Hawking. But it was fun this week to watch her, you know, walking around in those 3-inch heels that she mentioned that I hadn't noticed previously, as she's trying to avoid the pendulum as she's giving her speech in the lamppost. I thought that was quite fun to watch, having heard her talk about that.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not totally clear who or what she's working for here. Like, I don't really think she's working for either the Man in Black or Jacob necessarily. Like, unlike with Alana, we don't get a suggestion that she's like following Jacob's instructions. And I mean, that description of her as a temporal policeman, it just sort of seems like she's, you know, beholden to the universe or the rules or to the islands. It's something where she's definitely like carrying out an agenda, but it might not be an agenda that's attributable to a specific entity per se.
Yeah, I definitely think we have enough evidence to say that, like, the island has a will of its own, and that will is most directly expressed through Jacob and kind of through the Man in Black.
But
they're
not
sort
always.
of its immediate avatars, but, like, you know, like your example from earlier about Jack getting a call from his grandfather's nursing home. Like, was that the island, you know, moving in some way, or like it is almost like a capital F fate arranging circumstances in such a way that these people get to where they need to be. Because I think, you know, I'm sure we'll discuss this highly esoteric topic many, many times in season 6, but like, you know, the island sort of wants to protect itself and preserve itself. And, you know, Jacob and the Man in Black are people. They're very strange and powerful and unique people, but they are sort of fundamentally flawed humans. And the island is sort of something else. Anyway, this is all. Yeah. All this is to say, I think it is possible that Eloise is sort of working for the island because she spent years of her own life there. I think it's very possible that she developed some sort of I think it's possible she has sort of her own relationship to the island.
I think you're totally right, and I think I'll go even a step further and say that, you know, the will of the island, or the island, you know, wanting to do things, like, I think it's pretty clear that the island is really part of some larger, you know, energy or, you know, mysticism in the universe. Like, clearly this show takes place in a world with an afterlife, with a purgatory. Right. The island is a place where those things seem to be, you know, closer to, you know, the real world as we know it than they are, you know, elsewhere, because of the, you know, the heart of the island and the energy that exists there. Like, clearly there's, I don't know if you want to attribute it to some kind of god or intelligent design, but clearly this is a world where there's some larger, you know, mystical force that's at work that's beyond our comprehension. And that the island seems to be channeling that, I would say. Right. Well, I really liked your comment a moment ago that Jacob and the Man in Black are both instruments in their own ways. Yeah. You know, and that gets back to probably, you know, yin-yang type ideas. You can't have the light without the dark. But it makes sense to me that it would be acting through both of them, even if one of them is, you know, sort of hell-bent on destroying it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a zillion times about how the Man in Black manipulates John Locke. But all of that manipulation in part paves the way for the Oceanic Six to return. You know, like, the Man in Black did help with some of that.
Right, which is also what Jacob wants for them to return, so that one of them can replace him, and it's also, you know, what Eloise wants this week, and she's not working for either of them. She's trying to help them get back. So that, I think that brings it full circle right there.
Yep. Anyway,
the universe, man, the universe. We have an interview this week.
Yeah, wow. We should shut up and let Jeff Fahey talk.
We should tell people that he was talking to us from the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. So he's having a little trouble with the battery on his phone, and he mentions that at one point. We actually recorded this interview in 2 segments as a result of that, but it should be pretty straightforward to listen to.
Enjoy.
We are here with Jeff Fahey, who played Frank Lapidus on Lost. Doesn't really need much of an introduction. Joined the show in season 4. Joined the main cast in season 6. Was a wonderful and chesty presence on the show, as Josh Holloway as Sawyer referred to him a couple times, which we'll get into. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us on The Hatch.
Oh, thanks, guys. It's a true pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really, really excited to hear about your experience on the show. But we typically like to open this just by starting at the beginning. So how did you get cast? How did you end up on Lost?
Well, it's quite a story. That I was working in Afghanistan at the time doing humanitarian work, and went from Afghanistan to Venezuela. So I was in Venezuela, and my manager, Jeff Goldberg, got a hold of me and said, they want to talk to you about doing a role on Lost. And I said, hey, Jeff, to Jeff Goldberg, I said, I'm going back to Afghanistan because I've got, you know, I was doing a lot of humanitarian work, which I'm still doing. But he said, wait a second, Jeff, you got to take this phone call from these guys, talk to Carlton Cuse. And he goes, do you understand what Lost is? I said, well, yeah, I hear it's a great show, which I had never seen, but I did hear great things about it. He said, it's like the biggest show in the world, man. You got to take this phone call. So I did. I got on the phone with Carlton, and we spent, and I'll never forget, it was on a mountainside outside of Caracas in Venezuela. And I went through 2 phone batteries while he explained the whole show. He went from the pilot through the first 3 seasons, pretty much, I mean, as much as he could, and then brought it right up to date. And so anyway, I went back to LA, met with Carlton and Damon at the Disney executive lunch room, which was wonderful. And I had been out of the country for a couple of years at that point. So it was all quite fascinating and interesting. And before I knew it, I was on the island in Oahu, working with a great group of people, all the wonderful producers. And it was when I first got to know Jack Bender, who was obviously one of the executive producers, but he was directing that episode. And so I did three episodes, and they asked me to stay. And so it was wonderful because they were able to keep the storylines somewhat open for me. So I was able to go back and forth to Afghanistan and North Africa and do my other work, the humanitarian work, and be on Lost, which I have to say, guys, it was like a gift to be working in these places in the world and to go from there to the island of Oahu. I mean, it was just incredible. Yeah. It truly was a gift. It was one of the great gifts of my whole career.
I was going to say, we hear that again and again from people who are on the show, how the creators were really willing to meet you where you were. I mean, that's just that story, not the exact same, details of that, but everyone has some version of that, of why it was a different experience for them from how the stuff usually works. What was it? I guess, what was it like? You were you referred to this, you were dropped into the middle of this thing, and it was already this big phenomenon, and you're just getting up to speed. What was that like, being dropped in there? What was it like when you showed up on set? How did it feel for you?
Well, one of the things in any actor in the business at any level of time that they've been in the business does understand that when you come into an existing show, or if you come into a film that's been filming for a couple months or a couple weeks, and you drop into what has already become a family, and especially in a series, in a TV show, because these relationships, professional, artistic, and social relationships have all been formed. And then you literally, as you said, are dropped into the middle of this. And you have to make an adjustment, which everybody does, because you at the end of the day, you show up and deliver your work. But sometimes you are less welcome, and it's not because the people aren't socially cool. It's just that they're so involved in their work that you're almost a drive-by. You come in, do an episode or two, and then you're on your way. And in the meantime, they're protecting and completely involved with what they're doing. So sometimes it's a little more difficult than others, but this was one of the gems, because I came into, at the time, which, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the, my battery. I can't believe the trouble we're having, guys. It's like the TV show. I feel like we are on the island. Okay, hopefully this is charging. But to that point, but this show, and being such a big show, and so many cast members, and the pressure that everybody's having on the show, they opened their arms. I mean, it was like I was coming home. I mean, that's the way I felt, from everyone on the production side, everyone on the writing side, all of the actors, all of the crew. I mean, it was it was like a homecoming, and I was coming in fresh and hit the ground running. No pun intended, with the helicopter.
Yeah, very good.
But to that point, and you can hear people say when they're promoting a show or a film they're on, and which one should is give a positive take on everything. But I have to say, this is real. I mean, I walked into a beautiful setting with a wonderful group of not just artists, but people. It was great.
Was there? Oh, go ahead, Rosie.
Yes.
I was just going to say, you alluded to this a bit, Jeff, but the character of Frank Lapidus is just so funny. And is kind of, there for comic relief in a lot of ways. He has all these incredible one-liners. Even when he's first introduced on the island, he's kind of stumbling through this jungle, and he runs into this cow.
Wasn't that the first line? I saw a cow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so wild. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel about this character when you read those first couple of scripts, and how did you approach that playing that role within the show, which could be so serious and so heavy?
Well, I think it came right out of the gate, right from the very beginning, when I read that. I think that was one of his first lines when he saw the people on the island. Of course, he had the scenes in the helicopter before the crash. But when I read that, and he looks up at these guys and says, "I saw a cow," and I knew we were off for a great ride. But if you remember, it actually was a bull. It was a bull, and they had a bull there. And I say, I saw a cow, and they didn't say anything. I didn't question it. I mean, it wasn't like we were going to get away with it. If you see the scene again, and I thought, if they're doing this intentionally, it's fantastic. And if they're just rolling with this because they couldn't get a cow that day and there was a bull there, I mean, I'm not even going to question that. I'll just roll with it. And so right from the get-go, it was very cool and relaxed. And to your question about the one-liners, I mean, I love the one-liners they gave me. And I hear people quoting them to me all over the world. I mean, just the other day, somebody said, "Hey, don't talk about sardines."
I think the line was, "Don't talk to me about bacon." Okay,
is it bacon?
It's bacon.
Yeah.
It works either way. What else do you hear from people? I'm so curious now.
Well, it's the ending, which exactly. What do you say? I mean, if you had a room of 100 people, 50 people loved it and 50 people hated it, and so take that and multiply it with the world. I mean,
yeah.
So I kind of I try to be a bit esoteric about it, if you will, because I mean it is somewhat. I mean, you can have 10 people and you will have 10 different interpretations on the ending, and also the whether they liked it or not. You know, aside from what the hidden meanings are. Some people felt, and I think to that point, it's usually the people who really wanted the show to go on that aren't satisfied with the ending, which is logical. That makes sense. And those who maybe had their fill and wanted to move on, maybe the ending was satisfying. But I think it's very acceptable for someone who really wanted the show to go on not to be satisfied. I mean, because that's very natural.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I thought, just rewatching parts of the ending recently with you in mind, because I knew we'd be talking. I mean, the whole ending kind of hinges on your character in a lot of ways. Like the fact that there's a pilot on the island and you're able to fly them out of there, and you're scrambling, patching up the plane while all of the crazy shit is happening elsewhere. It's like. And it's pretty cool that you got to play that role at the end.
Oh, it was beautiful. Yeah. And one would wonder, is he flying them? Is he taking them across the river? Is he taking them on to the next place? I mean, because those who, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll have to ask you about this, the ones that were on the plane were the ones who were actually still alive, correct?
Yes.
In the end. So, then one wonders, what is that? Is he taking them from the so-called purgatory back into their real life? Were they in a parallel life for temporarily? I mean, one can just go on and on about what are the hidden meanings of all these different parallel worlds.
Well, that's so interesting, because I hadn't thought so. I mean, presumably, one would think like, okay, you took off Kate and Sawyer and Miles and Richard and Claire on that plane, and presumably they get to live the rest of their lives, but we don't actually see that. So maybe you're right. Maybe that plane disappears beyond the horizon or goes down or never returns to the real world, and they go straight to the afterlife.
And if you look into mythology and look for the meaning of the character Lapidus, you'll find some interesting jazz.
I saw some stuff on the Lostpedia page. So is that something you were actually thinking about, or was on your mind when?
No, that I had found out later through my own research. because they were quite cool about, at least for me, about leaving a lot of it to you and your own interpretation. I know the writers, and Carlton and Damon certainly had their own story and their own subtext to everything, but they kind of left a lot up to us. At least I can speak for myself on that. But in the interpretation, which goes back to your question about how did I feel about the one-liners. I mean, the interesting thing is that I had spent so much time going back and forth to Afghanistan and North Africa and back to Hawaii to film that if you notice in the first 2 seasons that I was on, there wasn't really a storyline. Frank would be in and out.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with them giving me great flexibility to go off and do my other work. And I'm sure if they wanted to, and if it fit in, that there was a strong storyline that involved Frank, then I would have stayed and spent more time on the island, certainly. But it was to my benefit for my other work that they gave me such flexibility with the storylines. And then, of course, in the final season, as they wanted to tie everything up, I was there much more. I was on the island much more.
Yeah, you were the main cast final season, as I recall.
Yes, yeah. Because for the first 2 seasons I was on, and again they were wonderful with contractually. They allowed me to be a guest, so I wasn't locked into the contract, and I had flexibility. And then and in the final season, as they made me a cast member, then you're locked in contractually to be there. Because as they wanted to tie it up, but they needed a contract to put it all together for all the cast members, for that matter, that they had planned on being in the finale or right up to the end.
Yeah. Interesting.
I
mean, I think even in season 4, which was your first season on the show, Frank Lapidus is part of this like party of scientists and travelers who arrive at the island, and it's
the boat people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rebecca Mader, who plays Charlotte, and Daniel Faraday and Miles. What was it like working with that group of actors? We've had a chance to talk to some of those folks, and it just seems like a blast.
Yeah, they were great. And we all came in on that that same episode in the helicopter. Yeah. And that the scene with the helicopter crashing, where everybody's got to jump and screaming and yelling. I think that was the first scene that we all did together.
Yeah.
And so we pretty much got to know each other pretty fast in that screaming and yelling and jumping and doing all that. But they were all wonderful to work with.
How do you film a helicopter crash?
You did a whole bunch of scenes like that too, flying and shit and crashing into the ocean and all that stuff.
Well, what they'll do is, for example, the helicopter itself, they had the body of a helicopter up on a scaffold about, I think maybe 10, 15 feet in the air. And then they've got, and so they had the cameras on the cranes, and they've also got the water machines because it was a storm. Yeah. And then they've got people literally shaking and moving the helicopter. And then the crashes are done on the special effects, but a lot of it is just like in car scenes. If you got the rain machine and people shaking and rolling the vehicle or the helicopter, as it were. And and then as you do all those quick edits, popping back and forth and tight shots and you've got the sound effects of the storm and all that, it pretty much it looks very real, but there's a bit of acting involved. Yeah,
no kidding. You didn't know anything about flying in real life, did you?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, not really. And so there are a couple of times they'd bring in a specialist, and God bless those cats, because I mean, they were great, but at the end of the day, it was, I'd say to Jack Bender, and when he was directing, just let me just pop. I'll just do some quick stuff, and I'll do this stuff up here, and I'll press that button and turn that switch, and I'll do it so fast it'll look real. But any real pilot will go, what the hell is he pressing and turning and pushing? But and the same with the plane when we had the jet.
So they taught you the steps.
Somewhat, and then I kind of took my own jazz, and if there was a button, I pressed it. I mean, because and a lot of the scenes, for example, in the plane, are happening at a very high pace, a very fast pace, and so to me it was easier just to, I knew we had buttons over here, and I had this over here, and I could just actually be moving left to right, up and down, and so on. And it would move so fast, it would look real to most of the audience. But I'm, as I said, any pilot, helicopter pilot or jet pilot who watches that, just going, what in the hell is he pushing? I mean, there should be people flying out of that plane right now.
Funny.
Yeah.
But one other big question I have about the Lapidus character. I mean, so you were supposed to be flying Oceanic 815, and you overslept that day, as the story goes, and missed it, and then you see them on the television. You're like, oh crap. I guess my question is, why do you think this guy gets on the freighter and goes to the island? Does he just want to prove that he's not crazy? Is he guilty? Does he think if he was flying the plane, like it wouldn't have crashed? What do you think his motivations are?
Well, remember that one of his heavy guilt problems is that when he didn't fly, it was his best friend that took the flight. He called his buddy and asked him to cover for him. And remember when he looks into the screen, and when they had the underwater shots of the wreckage.
Yeah, the pilot's not wearing his wedding ring, and it's wrong.
Yeah. And so that's where he knew something was afoul. And so I think there are a lot of reasons, but certainly one of them that I played was guilt. And then he got caught up in which we didn't really go into how he ended up necessarily on the boat going back. I mean, they dealt with it, but they didn't go into detail how I entered the picture. But for my play of it, I went on the guilt thing, that he had to find out what was going on, because it was his best buddy who died in his stead.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, do you ever, I mean, as you referred to earlier, you never had like a flashback episode. Do you ever wish we got, more on Frank's background, or what else would you have wanted to see or learn about this guy if we had done that?
Well, honestly, first and foremost, I would have loved to have seen the show go on itself. But that's me, who was only on it for 3 years. But, you can talk to some of the people who were on it for 6 years, and it's a grind, I mean, that was a day in and day out. That was a full-on job for the main cast members, and certainly for the writers and the producers and the directors. So it was quite a task. And I'm sure at the end of 6 years, a lot of them were drained creatively. But to your question, first of all, would have loved to seen the show continue on. And yes, absolutely. For storyline and for exploration as an actor and as a participant storyteller. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen them go deeper and further along with Frank's character. But again, if the show had gone on for a couple more years, I would have been happy with the way they were handling Frank, because there was as you guys had said earlier, it was very interesting and kind of offbeat the way they dropped Frank in and out of these different episodes. And and
even the way he functions within the episodes he's in, there's all this ridiculous stuff happening around him, and he's just cool as a cucumber. He sees like,
well,
go ahead.
As a character, I kind of always looked at it as hell, we could have been stranded in the Arctic, but here we are on this beautiful island. So I kind of used that, not as some heavy emotion, but just as as a kind of off the cuff attitude that, we are in a strange place, but it's a bit of paradise also. So I kind of use that as a humorous approach to it. But guys, they gave all that to me in the writing. I mean, there really wasn't a lot that I had to do to discover as the character, other than what they had. I mean, they pretty much handed it to me on a platter.
That's interesting, and I like that interpretation a lot, though, because as I, going back and rewatching some of your stuff, you always want to get off the island, right? Like you're fixing up the plane, you're making it clear, like, okay, we got to figure this out, but you never seem that unhappy or that, stressed about what's going on. Like your famous line, I think probably one of your two most famous lines, "We're not going to Guam, are we?"
Yeah.
I rewatched that scene and I'm looking at it and thinking, gee, like, he doesn't seem like freaked out about this. He doesn't seem like he's, going to panic. It's like, well, I guess we're going back to the island. You just kind of roll with it.
Well, it seems with Frank, the difficult part of his life was when he wasn't on the island.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how stressed he was when he first comes in, that first scene he's working and that little travel agency. I mean, he's half a basket case, and it seemed that he just seemed to become more relaxed the longer he was on the island, and then dealt with the situations as they came. But again, that, the actor brings part of it, but the actor brings something to it's a reaction to what's on the paper, so the interpretation first comes from the word, comes from the script. And so to that, I mean, it's just incredible writers and wonderful, again, great producers. And it was a wonderful creative environment. It was a good, relaxed, creative environment.
Yeah. We've had, by the way, in addition to Jack Bender, Gene Higgins on the show, and both of them must have been so awesome to work with.
Yeah, Gene, I love Gene. Yeah, Gene's wonderful. And Jack, I'm still good friends. I'm very close with Jack. I mean, we just texted the other day. Actually, I'm going to text him and tell him I was talking about him here on the show. And, he's quite an artist, a painter and a sculptor. I mean, amazing.
No, I
Jack,
know.
I'm giving you a plug right now. And you know what? When you were talking just now, it was bacon. Thank you.
You remember now.
I don't know where the hell the sardines came from. What was that? Jeez.
One before we lose the thread. You talked about your character getting more and more relaxed, which one I love because that speaks to just the nature of the island, that this was all a group of people that, were kind of miserable off the island and then, found something there. So I like that. But you talked about being relaxed. I joked about the chesty thing before, but we're watching season 5 right now, and this is when the buttons start to come undone on your shirt, which sort of seems like it became a running gag probably on the set as well. Yeah. Where did that come from?
Well, it came from the fact that we were on an island, and I didn't want to button that damn shirt up every day. And I'll never forget Jackie go, "Hey, Jeff, can you button up this?" I say, "Jack, we're on an island. If this were real, I wouldn't even have this damn thing on." But so it did become a running joke. So the more they joked about it, the more I unbuttoned it.
That's too funny.
Yeah, I had wished that they had kept me in the original wardrobe I had that I landed on. Remember the cargo pants and the Hawaiian shirt? I mean, that would have been wonderful. But I ended up in the, what was it? Was it the last season or the last 2 seasons?
I think the entirety of the last 2 seasons.
The real official pilot's uniform. Yeah.
I mean, who's going to walk around for 2 years on an island with that shirt on?
You didn't have a lot of options, I guess.
No, I didn't. No.
I guess. I guess I'm just wondering, like, you were involved. There were a bunch of like crazy fight sequences too. Like there was the stuff with Kimi at the end of Martin Durand at the end of the 4th season, where you're tied to the helicopter and there's a gun battle, and and then you race into the temple in season 6 while the smoke is going around. I just wondered if you had any particular recollections of some of those action sequences, because they all look like they must have been pretty wild to film.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I've been in the business for, God, it's going on 47 years now, so there's been action everywhere. But they had a great stunt crew too, and a group of stuntmen. So any of the heavy action, which I didn't have to. I mean, there was some action for me, but I don't think I ever did anything that I really needed to have a stunt double. I may have, I don't remember, but to that point, the action that was on the show for me wasn't very. There wasn't a whole lot of it. I mean, I had actually forgotten about it until you just reminded me. The helicopter, there was that shootout, and then and what happened in the temple?
Oh gosh, you were just running through, waving guns around, trying to escape from there.
Come on, Sam. Yeah, that was and I got paid for that. I mean, my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please.
I was going to say, were there any particular actors that you especially enjoyed working with, or have recollections from working with them on set, things that stand out in your mind?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, I have to say, and this isn't being political, but every single one of them I enjoyed. And I wish that Young-jin and I had more stuff together. Yeah, I really enjoyed working with her. I mean, I enjoyed working with everyone, but, we had a couple moments there of some storyline stuff. And she's such a wonderful actress. I mean, my God.
As I recall, you were wandering around with her in the creepy, empty Dharma village at night.
Yeah, and it would have been nice if we had some more of that stuff, and whatever it would have been. And Kevin Durand, I mean, I loved working with Kevin, and all those cats on the boat. But I don't want it to seem like I enjoyed anyone more than anyone else, because it really was an easy lift for an actor to walk into that. And I think the reason being, because there are a lot of different elements that make something easy or easier, and other things that make things difficult and more difficult and more challenging. And it can be the material, it can be the producers, the directors, the crew, the environment, the location, the other actors. I mean, because everybody works in different ways, and every once in a while, again, I'll go back to where I started the whole interview with. Every once in a while, you have a gem where everything gels together on every level, and from the writing to the producing to the directing, the actors, your co-workers, the crew. Crews are so important, and I mean, everybody on the crew, even to the food, the craft service. And I mean, it's all so important. I really think that what makes a show as successful as Lost was, is that every single element of that whole machine is working at its best. And you're fortunate enough to have all of those elements come together, whether it's for one film, one series, one season. But this happened for 6 seasons, and it's, again, starts with the writing, but goes all through every element, all the way to the food that the people are eating, and the way everyone is taking care of one another.
Well, that's actually interesting. People taking care of one another. And thank you for reminding us, because I meant to ask you this. You mentioned Martin Durand playing Kimi. Kevin Durand playing Martin Kimi. Yeah. My bad. Kevin, we had Kevin on last year, and I'm just curious if you remember this. He told us that his first day on the set, his first film scenes out on that boat, that he was seasick and feeling like he was not doing very well with the acting, and he basically told us that you gave him this great pep talk and told him that he was killing it, and compared him to Christopher Walken and Marlon Brando, and that he felt great after that. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes, I do. I remember the day. And just, I mean, when you have a good relationship with other actors, we all share little ideas. And I thought I remember saying to him that what he was doing reminded me of a combination of those two actors together, the way he was doing the scene.
I've got to say, I appreciate that the way Jeff played this character was like, you know what? I'm on a beautiful island. I'm going to pretend that I have like some Jimmy Buffett on in the background and just enjoy this as much as I can, despite all of the absolutely ridiculous stuff that's going on around me. That really is the energy that Frank brings.
It's such a good interpretation of that character. And I also loved that his whole thing with the, chesty and the hair on his chest that was shown was just as a result of like, we're on an island, man. Like, I'm unbuttoning my shirt just that Jeff wanted to do that. It's so great. It's so great. By the way, he mentions his humanitarian work a couple of times here, and he sent us some info about that. He's done stuff all over the world, and it's quite cool. We're gonna put some info about that on our Twitter, which is at the Hatch Podcast. So if you want to learn more about Jeff's work, go to at the Hatch Podcast on Twitter.
Yes, and we will have the second part of our conversation with Jeff next week. Next week we'll be watching The Life and Death of Jeremy Bentham. Gonna have a lot to talk about next week as well. That really seems to be the theme this season, but it should be fun.
No doubt, no doubt. In the meantime, we'd love it if you could rate and review the podcast. Just whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get this, leave a rating and review. It helps other people find the show.
Sammy already mentioned that we are on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast. We are also on Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. If you want to share your thoughts about the show, to call and leave us a hot take, you can do so at 9546-DHARMA.
Our cover art is by Danny Roth, and our theme music is by Andy G. Cohn.
See you next time.
Namaste.